Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be doing my bracket predictions for the mid-season madness. Kicks off tomorrow, 9:30 p.m. Eastern. Take that as you will for whatever your time zone is. Obviously, games happening in Korea, so they're going to be going later into the night. You can see 9:30, 11, 12:30, and 2. As we kind of move on, I'm going to go through the bracket in the order that the games will actually happen. The order is a little odd, so we'll go through and we'll talk about it as we go. But let's jump in, and let's talk about the games. First matchup is the pink battle, Florida Mayhem versus the Hangzhou Spark. This is an interesting matchup to me. I think the Spark are in a weird place because, honestly, they haven't looked great recently. Until they got that win over the Charge in the knockouts. But, you know, going into kind of think about the opens and the spring stage qualifiers, they just didn't play the best. They looked worse in the Inferno, they looked worse in the Charge. They got that big reverse sweep win against the Charge, and then were able to get that win against Dreamers, and that has kind of elevated them into the spot. So I don't feel the best about the Spark. On the same vein with the Mayhem, they had that loss to the Gladiators. They got swept by the Gladiators, and they got revenge against the Gladiators in that 5-map series. They won the Pro-Am, and they're looking better. They're definitely looking pretty good and pretty solid, all things considered. So I'm very interested to see kind of this matchup because it's two teams in kind of weird places. The Spark are a team that we expected going into the season to be one of the best teams in the country, best teams in the world, best teams in the league. You know, kind of the favorites in this Eastern region. They weren't in the qualifiers. Mayhem started the season well, have kind of had a bit of a dip, and so I think it's an interesting matchup. I think when you think about what these teams' strengths and weaknesses are, they're pretty similar. Winston, both of these teams want to play Winston, and I think if you're the Spark, that makes you feel good because you know that the Mayhem are not going to really try to force you off of it because that's what they're going to want to play the most. I think Shy and Leave as a duo, very, very good. They have struggled a bit, but I think they're finally starting to kind of figure out where they are. Support line is interesting. I think support line is really the place where I think you would give the edge potentially to Florida. I think it's the only position where they clearly have the edge. Though someone is also very, very good, so it's pretty close. This is a close game to me. I think it's hard to predict. Just going off of gut instinct, I feel a little bit better about the Spark, but not that much better. So I'm going to say 3-2 victory for the Spark or the Mayhem. Part of this is just I want to see the Spark play the Rain. I think it'd be a fun game to see them play. I think it'd be a cool matchup. So I'm going to go with the Spark to take this one by a close 3-2 and drop the Mayhem down to the lower bracket. Next, the Boston Uprising versus Houston Outlaws. This is the game I'm most excited for of the ones we know about so far because these teams have not played yet this season. Obviously, both the Western region teams, the 2 seed, the Houston Outlaws, the 3 seed, the Boston Uprising. They're the only two teams in the regular season to take a map off the Atlanta Reign, who we know kind of the best team in the world right now. So these are two teams that I think are very, very close together. I would personally say that if you were to make a power ranking right now, Boston and Houston are not separated. They're in the same tier. I think Boston is playing very well right now. I think they're clicking. I think they're starting to kind of get their stuff together. The Outlaws have been interesting. I think that they've looked, relatively speaking, like one of the best teams in the league. But I think one of the things about Houston that's been a little bit concerning to me is that in some of their recent matches before the final week of the qualifiers for them, they had a few times where I just thought they didn't play the best Overwatch. They played different compositions. They kind of ran different looks that I wasn't a huge fan of. I didn't love their Doomfist compositions and stuff like that. I don't expect to see a lot of that here, but I think right now Boston is kind of playing with all the momentum in the world, and they look really, really good right now. Houston has had the benefit of they've had extra time off. They got to travel to Korea earlier, presumably. I don't know exactly when they went, but you'd imagine that they had the ability to travel earlier. I imagine they did. So it's been a little bit of time since we've seen them. So it feels a little odd to kind of feel like either way, one way or the other, this is a really kind of one-sided affair. So I think it's going to be very, very close. I think this is going to be the game of the weekend. Honestly, these two teams I think are super close together. To me, they are second and third in the Western region, potentially second and third in the world. And we will know by the end of this game who's in the better spot. So I think it's going to be close. I think it's going to be a very good matchup. I think it's going to go the distance, but I am going to say, just based on what we've seen so far, I feel a little bit more confident saying that the Houston Outlaws take this one by a score of 3-2, but I think it's going to be very good. I think it's going to be a phenomenal match. It's going to be one of the best games of the tournament, and I am all in on Boston. I'm a huge Boston fan. I think they look really, really good, but Houston right now I think looks a little bit better. We're seeing a little bit more of Shu and Violet, though Twilight, Izayaki, Legiano are playing very, very well. Kind of Smurf versus Fearless, super, super close. So I think it's really, really, really good matchup across the board. I think it's really kind of even across the board. But Houston has looked a little bit better right now. But I could easily see them going either way. I think both those teams are really, really good. Next, Hangzhou Spark versus the Atlanta Reign. Spark have been a little inconsistent, so I don't think they look to be as good right now as a team like Boston or Houston, who are the only teams that have taken maps off Atlanta. Atlanta's been in the Eastern region now for a few weeks, which I think is not something to overlook. They got to come into the Eastern region early and scrim and get really good data and information and kind of seeing how their style of play works in this region. Maybe they didn't play Hangzhou, maybe they played teams like Guangzhou or some of the contenders teams, like O2 Blast or whatever. But I think there is a reason I think that the Reign are in a pretty good spot. I think they're a very, very good team. I think that they shouldn't really struggle. I think the Spark have the potential to cause an upset in this matchup. They definitely have the potential to kind of surprise them and shock them. But I think the Reign just looks so clean, so clinical. They look so good every time we see them. I feel really confident that the Reign are going to take this one, and they're going to do it by a pretty dominant fashion. I'm going to say 3-0 just because the Reign have lost very few maps this season. There's not reason to believe that, for the Spark to take a map, you're saying that they're as good as Boston or Houston, and I haven't seen enough from them right now to say that that's the case. I don't think they're bad by any means. I think they're a very good team, and they're a very solid team. But right now, I feel just a little bit better. Not even just a little bit better. I feel much better about the Reign than I do the Spark, and I'm going to give the Reign the win here. Next is Houston Outlaws versus the Seoul Infernal. This is an interesting one to me. Much kind of similar to what I said with the Mayhem versus Spark game, where those are two teams that want to play Winston, so they are going to try to kind of favor Winston. The Infernal are way, way, way better in Winston than any other hero. The Outlaws, obviously, with Fearless in, love to play Winston. They do have Gargoyle. They can play other stuff if they want to. But generally speaking, they want to play Winston. And so these are two teams that are pretty, firm, solid. They both have two supports, right? They both don't have the kind of damage flexibility. They have, MM3 and Zest on Soul, Happy and Pelican on Houston. So I think it's an interesting one. I think the Seoul Infernal have been, to me, one of the most impressive teams. You consider just what they've done. Their record is very, very good. They have one loss so far this season. It was their first match of the season against the Seoul Dynasty. They didn't drop a single game during the knockouts, which is really, really good. Houston, also a one-loss team right now. So these are two teams that, in theory, are very, very close together. They're very similar in terms of what we've seen from them. They're very similar in terms of the types of performances we can expect out of them. And so I think this is a really good matchup because it'll be interesting to kind of see where the Infernal stack up with the other teams in the Eastern region or in the Western region. Because obviously we've been talking a bit this season, in the preseason and even since the season started, that the Western region is seemingly the better region. A lot more talent in the Western region. You look at teams like Atlanta and Houston and Boston, and even the Gladiators and the Mayhem. There's tons of talent on just those teams alone. They kind of cannibalized or picked off the bones of a lot of those Eastern region teams as they fell. And now the Seoul Infernal are kind of one of the few remaining kind of bastions of that Eastern region style of play. I don't think these two teams are particularly far off. Honestly, I think the Infernal, right now, I would say they're probably a top 5 team in the world. But the way that Mag plays, the way that Skewed and Fixa have played so far this season, and M3 and Zest have been firing on all cylinders, I think the team looks very, very good. Are they Houston level? Are they Atlanta level? Are they Boston level? Where do they stack up with some of those teams we perceive as some of the best teams in the Western region? This will be a really kind of good metric to test that. But I think you have to feel a little bit better about the Houston Outlaws right now. Yes, the Seoul Infernal are going to be playing in front of the home crowd. Yes, they're going to have a lot of stuff going their way. I think the Infernal are going to make it close. I think it'll be a 3-2 series for the Outlaws. I think the Outlaws are going to have 2 tough back-to-back games, especially when they have to play them in the same day. That is tough. I think if they win both of their games, it's going to take a lot of work of kind of just clawing your way through, because I just think you got to win back-to-back games, in the same day. And in front of the home crowd, you get that kind of Soul Infernal home buff, which I think will help them a bit. So I have to feel right now just a bit better about the Outlaws, even though I do think the Infernal will keep it close, will challenge them. I think the Outlaws are firing on a little bit more of a kind of high tempo. And as much as I think Fixa and Skewed are playmakers, and they are doing a lot in the support line, Shu and Violet is another level of good in that way that I just feel like it's very difficult. No matter how good the Infernal are, most teams are going to struggle to get past the Houston Outlaws. Let's move now to the lower bracket. Florida Mayhem versus the Seoul Infernal. I've been singing the praise of the Infernal, so I think they're probably the favorites in this matchup. I don't want to write off the Mayhem at all. I think the Mayhem are one of the most interesting teams to look at, because I think that at their best, they can challenge and take on most of the teams here. I think they're very, very good. Their struggles against the Gladiators during the knockouts give me a little bit of hesitation. I think the Mayhem have not looked like the best team in the world recently. Not that they look bad by any means. To me, the Infernal are on fire right now. And the Infernal are just getting better and better and better. I don't think the Mayhem have gotten as much better than they were at the beginning of the season than a team like the Infernal. I think the Mayhem have obviously improved. I'm not sitting here saying like they haven't gotten better since the season started. No, they have. But I think the Infernal have just skyrocketed into one of the best teams in the world. And I don't think the Mayhem have reached quite that level yet. I don't think it'll be a sweep. I don't think it'll be super one-sided. But I am going to say a 3-1 for the Infernal, who I just think right now look to be one of the stronger teams in the league. And so I think they're going to take this one. And it'll be a close result that ultimately goes in the Infernal's favor. Next, Boston Uprising versus Holland Joe Spark. Really interesting matchup with some really good teams here. I think the Spark are one of the tougher teams to rate, because when we've seen them play their best, they look really, really good. We've seen them kind of on a down until the knockouts, when they just kind of really figure their stuff out. And so if we get them at their best, I do think they can challenge, potentially beat the Uprising. But I'm super high on the Uprising, and I know it's going to be the thing that bites me at the end of the day, that I am like all in. I think the Uprising are right now a top 3 team in the world. I think they look really, really good. I think it took them time to get some of their stuff together, but I don't think talent was ever the problem. I think in some ways it's just kind of motivation. How do you get players like Lee Jae-gon and Izayaki and Smurf and Striker and Birdring, who've all won tournaments and who've all won grand finals before, to care about the average regular season game? You don't. Like, it's very hard to get those players to care about those types of matches to the same level as players who are rookie, that are unproven, that want to kind of get on that stage. These guys just wanted to play with good players. And when we're seeing them in these tournament settings, when we saw them the way they played through the knockout bracket, they looked very, very good. They looked very dangerous, very, very strong. So I feel like they are the favorite in this matchup, and I think they're going to take it, and it's going to be probably like a 3-1. I think the Spark are good. Spark are definitely good enough to win games in this tournament, but I just think the Uprising look really, really good right now, and I struggle to pick a Spark team that has been a little too inconsistent for me against the Uprising team that I think really has looked very, very good, with the exception of like a single match they've had all season. They've looked really, really good, and I think that's a huge part of why I feel good about where they are as a team. Next, we have the winners finals. If my bracket were to be true, be the Atlanta Reign against Houston Outlaws once again. I think it'll be a closer affair the second time around than it was the first time around. I think there's a reason why the Outlaws have been running stuff like Doomfist. I think they've been working behind the scenes to try to find ways to make the Reign's compositions not work as well, try to make them a little bit more uncomfortable, and I think they're going to push them as far as they can this time around to a point where they feel like they can beat the Reign. It's tough because the Reign look very, very good. Lip is just such a phenomenal player. He just kind of controls the game in a lot of ways. And they've been getting really good performances out of Chio and Fielder. This is a very support-heavy thing. I mean, look, the 4 teams that I have left in my bracket are arguably the 4 best support lines in the league right now. Arguably, these are the 6 best support lines in the league in general, right? Like, supports are super important right now. And I think that the Reign just do so much with Chio and Fielder. Chio and Fielder are such phenomenal players. We haven't even seen Vigilante yet this season. That's how good this support line is with just the 2 that they have. They're very hard to counter. Houston's very good. They have a good support line as well. They can do a lot of things. I think this game will be closer than it was before. Even if it's still a 3-1 score line, I still think they'll be pushed. But I just don't see right now how you can predict against the Atlanta Reign. I'm going to say a 3-2 because I think they just are that good. But the Reign are so good. We haven't seen them in a bit, and I think that's the thing that could be the worst kind of painful process of, like, we haven't seen this team play in a while, so they could be better than they were the last time we saw them, or they could be worse. We don't really have a way to know. We don't know what the situation is, so we'll see. But right now, I think you have to pick the Reign to be at least the favorite to win this whole tournament. Even if they don't win, they have the best chance, I think. So that's how I feel about the Reign. They just have looked so good this season. Next, we have the Seoul Infernal against the Boston Uprising. Another really interesting matchup. I think this is another good one. Another one that's kind of firing on all cylinders. Where the Uprising have the advantage in this one, I think, is just, one, I think they have more playmakers. Obviously, they have more players, but I think Boston is a little bit more meta-resistant. I think they feel way more comfortable playing more comps. You know, if you have to go on an off-tank heavy map, Kalios feels like a pretty solid piece on that team. Plus, you think about the support line, they have the double flex support, so they can go really hard in on the kind of like Twilight, Ana compositions, whose Twilight's just looked really, really good. So I think the Seoul Infernal are a very good team, and I think that they have the means to kind of win games in matchups against teams like Houston or Atlanta or Boston, who just feel very, very good. Where I think Boston has kind of started to figure out how to work their team is just, if we know we have to play Ana for a map, just put in Twilight, and he just kind of dominates games for you. And you're getting similar performances out of the Infernal, but to me, there is a feeling of just the experience from the players on the Uprising, just to me, is so important. And these are all players who are playing very well, too. They look really, really good right now. I think it's tough to view them as kind of a team kind of on the down in this matchup. I just think they just feel like the stronger and better and more well-rounded team. So I'm going to give the edge to the Uprising. I think they're the better team. I think they take this one. I'll say a 3-2. I think the Infernal can push them and will push them, but I think the Uprising ultimately are the team that wins it. This, of course, gives us a rematch between the Uprising and the Outlaws. It could go either way, like I said the first time around. I tend to feel like in bracket play, rematches tend to flip. It's not always true. Honestly, in fact, usually it's not true, but you think about in the knockouts, the Gladiators beat the Mayhem, and then the Mayhem won the second time, and the team that moved on. So it does happen. It depends usually on kind of how close it is, the kind of game you get. But it doesn't always happen. You know, it happened in the playoffs last year where the Outlaws beat the Shock, and then the Shock beat the Outlaws. So it could happen. I think usually the way it works is that the upset happens early, and then the better team wins the second time around. So I think if Boston's going to beat Houston, their chances are better in the first matchup. I don't think it happens in the second matchup. I think it's a good game again. I'll say a 3-2 once again. That sets up an Atlanta versus Houston finals. And I'm going to say it is a 4-2 finals win for the Atlanta Reign. I've already said all I need to say, but I just think right now the Reign are such a good team. They look to be the best team in the world. They're playing at a high level. I think the meta is just way too good for them. The way that they can play Sombra, the way they can play Winston. They can get away pretty much playing whatever you want. Stalker's playing really, really well. Chiofield, they're playing really well. This feels like the meta that is designed for them. If there's a meta that's good for them, it's going to be this one. You could say some things about Houston, but to me, the difference really is I think Houston's good on a lot of places, but in terms of Tracer play, like, yeah, I think Atlanta's the better Tracer team. I even think Boston's the better Tracer team than Houston. I think Houston really does rely very heavily on their supports, and just the way that Lip is able to kind of find value against supports, the way Stalker is able to find value against supports, and when you're also playing against a team that has equal kind of playmaking capability out of their supports, it's very, very, very hard to be that same level of successful in that kind of matchup. So I think it's a really good matchup. I'm really excited for this tournament because I really like all the teams here. I think they're all pretty good. No one's won a tournament before, which I think is awesome. Guaranteed someone will get their first ever win in a tournament, which is nice. There you go. That's my bracket. That's how I think it's going to go. Let me know in the comments down below your thoughts. If you agree with me, if you disagree with me, why you agree or disagree, anything like that. Whatever you have to say. And as always, if you enjoyed this video and want more like it in the future, consider liking and subscribing. Your support does mean a bunch and help out a bunch with the channel. That's going to be all for this time. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.